Live from Schorr Manor Studios, this is Tales from a Small Town Journalist with Matt Schorr.
Hey guys, thanks for checking out this episode of Tales from a Small Town Journalist, the podcast dedicated to all the weird and wonderful stories you are only going to hear about from reporters working in small communities just like yours. I'm Matt Shore, and I was one of those small town reporters for almost 10 years before I finally hung up my camera and my notepad. And in that time, I got to have some interesting experiences working with the public, and I got to know a lot of other reporters who also had interesting experiences working with the public. Before I go any further, I do want to make sure and mention this is a listener supported podcast supported by wonderful folks just like you. There's several great ways that you could show us some support. One, I'm not going to lie, some financial love would be awesome. If you want to head over to our bookstore, just visit www.mattshorr.net. That's MATTSCHORR.net and check out the shop icon there at the very top of the screen. We've got comic books, we've got novels, we've got stuff for young readers, old readers, all over the spectrum. Check it out, see if anything there strikes your interest, and we'd really appreciate it. Another great way to show some support would be just to spread the word. Let people know about this goofy podcast and its goofy host and the goofy stories we like to tell. Share it on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. The new one is TikTok. Go share it out there as well. And hey, if you're using Snapchat, that's fine too. But the point is, just let people know about it. Uh, Give them a good shake if you see them in person. Tell your friend, tell a loved one, tell a random stranger you meet on the street about this show. Let them know all about it and just help get us out there. This episode, we're going to try something a little bit different. Talking to somebody a little bit outside the mainstream. We're going to be speaking with Robert Anderson of the Comics Advocates. Uh, this is he's not alone in this. There's this subculture, I guess you could say, for lack of a better word. I don't know. It sounds negative, so I don't like it, but it's the best I got. This group out there who gets the word out about independent writers, creators, artists, comic books, all this sort of thing. So it falls into the realm of kind of like fringe journalism, I guess you might say, but it's not in the sense of like InfoWars or any of these daily costs. I don't know how to pronounce that one, but they're not spreading just unsubstantiated, unverifiable conspiracy theory level news articles. Like they're actually just getting the word out about independent creators, writers out there who wouldn't otherwise be noticed in any way at all. It's a community that puts out news in this sense. It's small. It's certainly not anywhere near the level of mainstream, but it's an important avenue for a lot of independent creators and self-serving. It has benefited me a few times as well. So, but it's I think it's an important aspect. It's some might not even want to truly consider it journalism, and I suppose in the strictest sense it's not, but it is informing the public about something vital. So I think it does fall within that classification to a point. So uh, Rob's had some interesting experiences doing this, getting the word out. He's an independent creator himself, and I wanted to just chat with him about what inspired him to do this and what it's been like for him doing this. It's a great chat, great, really informative and unique, and a little bit away from. I like to do things a little bit different with this once in a while, so here's another one of those opportunities. So let's switch gears. Let's go check in and chat with Robert Anderson, aka Mr. Anderson, right now. This episode of Tales from a Small Town Journalist is brought to you by Grave Diggers Magazine, unearthing the horror stories of yesteryear and uniting them with the horror of today. Enjoy terrifying comics from the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, alongside columns and interviews from horror creators of the modern era. Grave Diggers, published by Schorr Manor Studio and available at mattshorr.net. All right, and now for something a little bit different. I'll be chatting with Mr. Anderson, comics creator and big advocate for independent comics creators. Why I invited him on this show because I feel like it is a bit of a branch of journalism, putting the word out about people we might not otherwise hear about. So, Mr. Anderson, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
Yeah, appreciate it. Let's dive into a little bit of, since we're talking about comics and most people associate comics with superheroes, let's get into your secret origin story. How did you get to become an independent creator and then where we're at now, advocating for independent creators?
Honestly, it all starts with a cartoon, believe it or not. I was 11, 12, and I was having a hard time at school. And I saw this back then. They did pilots in the morning, and I used to wake up early because I'm very hyper. And that was part of the reason at school. They wanted to basically put me in a different school. I was in a school for gifted kids. They wanted to go the opposite way. They wanted to go the extreme opposite. So they thought something was wrong with me. I was unable to learn because they'd been putting me in these classes, and these classes weren't helping my test scores. So I watched this thing, and it's actually behind me. I don't think you can actually see it, but it's on one of the shelves. It's the Pride of X-Men. It was the first X-Men cartoon, not the one in the 90s, but a pilot one that was actually narrated to a certain degree by Stan Lee. I saw this. It was a bunch of freaks. It was a bunch of people who didn't fit in, and I didn't feel like I fit in because some of the things I wanted to talk about was like war, and I wanted to talk about what was going on with the environment. And I'm 11 and 12, and my dad is like, he's not dumb. He's not any of that. You have to test them. So this whole point in my life, I feel like, I have people telling me I'm stupid. You want to believe it. And so I associated with this so much that I was like, I really like these characters. So I ran to the local comic store when I finally realized after 4 weeks, there was nothing else coming from that series. So, and there was no internet back then, kids. We couldn't look this stuff up. You had to patiently wait. So I figured, whatever, I guess this isn't going to happen. It wasn't the first time I saw a cartoon, one episode, never saw another one. So I was like, all right, let me go to the comic books, the local newspapers. There used to be stands that sold newspapers, kids. And there used to be comics in these places. So I grabbed the X-Men comic, took some money, bought it, got it back home, and it had none of the characters that were in that pilot's thing. They were in a season with totally different characters. But I loved the premise of the idea, so I stuck with it. I started to learn to read by literally having a comic book on the left side and a dictionary on the right side. And I started to teach myself to learn to read one word at a time, literally. And this was a complicated time of my life. They wound up giving me an IQ test. And from all the reading things before I got into comics, I was below level. I was basically illiterate for my age. And I couldn't read past, like, I think a second grader. So like the little pop-up books were basically the only thing that would ever really work for me. So with that in mind, I got this IQ test. The whole time I'm reading comic books, I'm continuing to learn to read. Turns out I was dyslexic, really, really dyslexic. Like I have things that go with it, dysphag me and all that. And because I was 12 by the time I got the IQ test, there was nothing they could do for me. And they knew it. I would have to go through the final year of school for junior high, basically trying to learn how to overcompensate for my dyslexia that they never treated me for my entire life. And I fell in love with comics so hard because it gave me the ability to read that. And I went from the test scores that were a third grader when I was in, sixth, seventh grade, all the way up to college text in 1 year. And they had never seen that. And that was because the IQ test turned out I had a very high IQ. As a matter of fact, I had the highest in the building. I could be part of Mensa anytime I wanted to. But that just goes to show you, if someone tells you that you're dumb, you're going to believe it. So if people keep telling you something, don't necessarily believe it just because someone tells you that. You know who you are better than anyone else. My father, I'll never forget, advocated for me the whole time. I used that passion that he had to protect me and advocate for me for my son who's autistic. And I got to see that whole journey continue where he's this autistic kid who rips up books. I made him a comic book. He stopped ripping up books, and now he's starting to learn to read books. So comics have this power that it unlocks something inside of us. I can't hear you for some reason. I think.
Sorry.
There you go.
Sorry about that. I've heard part of your story, so that's hearing the rest of it. That's absolutely fascinating, heartbreaking, and inspiring all at the same time. Moving on, is that what drove you to some of the work that you do now, advocating for independent comics and creators out there?
I advocate for comics because I owe comics. I owe my comics the careers I've had, the abilities I've had, the stories I've written. Without comics, I don't know if I'd ever make that connection. I don't know where my life would have gone. Could I have learned to read? I don't know, because they didn't know how to train someone like me at that point. So I owe a lot to comics. The reason I've always tried to help independent creators is because someone needed to. When I got into comics, I'm a Marvel DC fan. I've got nothing against Marvel or DC. I love comic books. Doesn't matter who makes them. They're interesting, I'll read them. So I'm not one of those guys who only cheers for one side. But I noticed no one was there helping comic book creators, content creators, comic creator-owned guys or the indie market. No one did that, despite being called, like, and I'm just making up names here because I don't want to call out of sight, but like indie fan comics only would cover one indie person they knew and 25 Marvel stories and 25 DC stories. No one strictly stuck with comic books. And that's how I started becoming an advocate for it. And this was based on what I'd seen with Buddy Scalera, who did the Creator Connection, who brought creators together, because my mindset was always that someone deserves some spotlight. Because I know when I first got into comics, no one would pay me any mind. And I'm sure you felt that too. In the very beginning of starting to create something, no one believes in you. They only start to believe in you when they see success. And the more success you get, the more people believe in you. They don't realize all the work that goes into that before success. I wanted to be there on the journey for creators, to give them that opportunity, to allow them to get to a place. And so, we did some things that I think have definitely helped some creators out. And I'm very proud of that work.
It's pretty amazing what all you've done. I certainly attest some of the success I've enjoyed to being able to get spotlighted once or twice on the things that you do. And it's interesting you talk about people trying to get into it and how nobody believes in them until they're successful. Well, then how do you reach that hurdle? I read a book back when I was still in college about filmmaking, and the first chapter was this page that all it was just nothing but whatever ideas you have, they're awful. Don't even bother. Nothing you do will be made. It's terrible. It's worthless. You're worthless. Anything that you write, nobody's going to even want to read it, make a movie out of it, make a comic out of it, anything. Just don't bother. Set this book down and forget it. And when you turn the page on chapter 2, it says, okay, you're still here. Now let's get started.
It's true. You're going to be a creator, whether it be on YouTube, TikTok. When you first start out, it's very lonely. Yeah, and I know a lot of people get the thing that, they have families sort of support them, but it's like that beginning, let's see them fail. And when it gets harder, they're encouraging you to give up. So you need that group that you can talk to, the people who are going through it, who have been through it. I'm in a great opportunity where I can talk to professionals in all the way up who've been published, and I talk to the brand new creators. And believe it or not, I get to share messages between the groups. And I'm really happy with that. With Continuum, we always talk about Continuum being the bridge to creators. No matter who you are, you belong in Continuum Comics. Give us a short story. Let's build the biggest library ever created of creator-owned stories. That's the point. And I'm happy to be in a position like that, to know names. But everyone talks about comics being a small little pond, a goldfish bowl. It's not true anymore. Kickstarter changed that. There's a gigantic world. I was talking to someone just last night, DJ, he's from Hawaii. My artist is from Mexico. One of my artists is from Prague. Another one is from Siberia. It just goes on and on. What connections we can make within this world now, and how together we are. And independent creators are the forefront of learning to work digitally with people to create content that's never been done this way before. You can literally work with someone and never talk to them, never hear their voice until you're in an interview like this, and you're suddenly like, I thought you would have had a deeper voice. So it's just one of those things. It's an amazing journey, but you need people. You need people on that journey because a lot of us won't stop believing in ourselves, but it can be very lonely. To have the people who are like, nah, I've been through that hump. This is what you do. That's priceless.
Yeah, definitely. And I mentioned, I think before we got started, you've got so many different irons in the fire. Can you list the different projects you have? We'll start with the ones that advocating for comics creators, and then we'll also make sure and mention the different projects you personally have.
All right. So for me, I have basically Comic Book Advocates, which Comic Book Advocates does back blogs, which back blogs looks at all the different Kickstarters that people tell us about. And it's hard because sometimes we have a long list. We get someone to come in and we talk about the title. We talk about the picture. We talk about the pitch line on it. And it's about whether or not you can grab an audience, because you have to do clever wordplay. Because a lot of people just launch it and they do the Field of Dreams thing. Okay, audience, come get me. That's not how it works. You have to find a way to incentivize someone to want to take the journey with you. If they're not friends or family, they don't know who you are. They're not going to be interested in something that just popped up on their screen unless you make them interested, which is the pitch. And then we do the Comic-Con forecast, which we call the comics forecast. And that tells where creators are going to be and what shows are going to be everywhere. We try to help comic book stores, but it's there. That's give and take whether or not someone nominates a comic book store, but we do try to highlight them as well. And then we do the Comics Newswire, where we just talk about creative news. We've gone across TikTok, we've gone across Twitter, we're on Instagram. We take all these shows and we try to do them. And of course, we highlight creators. As a matter of fact, I'm starting up a new show that's going to be the kind of fun show. I'm going to try. See, we're in a new frame of world where everyone wants to quickly do something, right? No one wants to be, after the last couple of years we have, stuck watching a video inside. A lot of us want to run outside and do something. So I made up a new thing, and I was going to share my screen and realized I actually can't right now. So
Sorry.
no, it's all right. The new show is going to be the 7 minutes with a comics creator. So if you saw a big white thing and I turned like Casper, that's why. Yeah, the comics 7 minutes with a comics creator. I'm going to try to get Matt on there to talk about his creations and what he does. And it's just going to be me, 7 minutes. But that 7 minutes means something to someone, because then you're telling him, give me just 7 minutes. Let me show you who this person is. And it's going to be quick. And I'll talk to the creators beforehand, because 7 minutes is kind of short. But you want to be able to have the topic. So I'll go over, okay, this is what I want to talk about. This is where we want to land. Let's go. And then it's like off to the races. And then we also do Comic Book Advocates who give us a press release. We'll put it out through there. Throughout the year, we do interviews and we do all these shows across all of social media. We got to break 1 million views on TikTok just a few weeks ago. So that was pretty impressive. The goal is 2 million views across all of social media. And if I'm doing my math right, we're at already 1.5 million. So we're almost going to be hitting my 2 million goal for this year. We hit 50,000 subscribers to comicbookadvocates.com, where the love of comics comes first. And I'm always looking to try to help creators. So I do panels. If someone asks me to do a special video, I'll do it if I think I can get the information. If I don't, I'll tell them, give me a couple weeks. We'll get the right people in place, and then we'll have a sit-down conversation. Because I truly believe this, and if there's anything that you take away from this, take this today. We rise together. Humans would not be where they were if we did not team up with other people. And you have to find your tribe. For me, it's comics creators who I can rise with. And I want us all to rise. I don't look at anyone as competition, because what I created is unique. It is not something anyone else can create, because I don't believe that it lives in their soul. I think as creators, we have the stories we have, and only we can tell them the way we're going to tell them. So I think that if we all treated it that way and didn't look at each other as anything other than another creator who's in the same boat we are, then the world would be a little kinder to us all.
I agree. I didn't make this quote, but I've always agreed with it, that I don't see us as competitors. I hope we all make it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if we all make it, it just makes everything better, because there's more stories. Because let's be honest, not everyone wants superheroes. We've seen manga, the anime, it's coming into comics. It's a totally different realm, not my realm. And I understand that, but that doesn't mean I'm going to hate on the manga guy next to me. I'm going to encourage it. We're going to find a way to get it into Continuum. And some of the comics I have coming out kind of take from a manga style, because I've acknowledged people want to connect with that. So it has that anime kind of manga style. And it's my storytelling as a writer.
Yeah, I'm with you on manga. Manga never quite resonated with me. A big reason is probably because when I was in college, I had some roommates who absolutely loved anime and just kept force feeding it to me, just convinced I would eventually love it. And all that did was make me hate it. And I finally had to reach the point where I look at it like the Beatles. It's like, look, I'm not totally into it, but I absolutely respect its importance. But I'm still probably not going to be as enthusiastic as you guys are about it. It took me a while to get here.
I have someone who comes up and goes, I have a 1 hour movie for you. Watch it with me. Sure. If he tells me I have to watch 700 episodes, I'm going to laugh at him and just walk out of the house. No, dude, you're on your own. See you in a month. Yep. Like, I respect them. Like you said, nothing but respect. They're creators just like us. Just because it's not my flavor doesn't mean it's not someone else's flavor. And we have to start thinking that way. We can all create something. Hell, I've got a character that farts and uses the farts like a green lantern ring. There's nothing that we can't do. I even in that book used a word train, a train that literally says words to hurt a character to prove that words can't hurt. That's what comics are about. Clever moments that can entertain the people we want to reach. As creators, we are trying to hold our hand out and give you something. And for me, and I'm sure you agree with this, we're trying to get, and I call myself an escape dealer now, and I get the weirdest looks, but it's great because I am dealing escapes from the world, because that's what a comic was to me. It was a safe world where I had a problematic childhood that I can escape into. Remember, I didn't feel like I fit anywhere, but there I fit. And that made everything better about my life. And since then, comics have always been, kind to me. I love comics. Comics are amazing. And when I see a little kid jumping up and down with Cat Dad or coming back to me and giving me ideas and things they want to see, there's nothing in the world like that. Even if an adult comes up and starts telling me what they think the story should go next, I did something right because I reached into them and inspired them to really think about the world I make. I go to shows, and I'm sure you get this, where people come up to you and go, I have been thinking about your story. Do you have the next issue? And that's the biggest compliment in life you can get.
I have had that a couple times, and yeah, you're right. It's a real good feeling to know that somebody took that much of an interest. Yeah. And one thing about comics that you mentioned, I tend to think of comics creators as sort of like as writers go, the island of misfit toys. Comics, they lend themselves to a sort of imaginative stories that you just really don't find anywhere, and almost until recently anyway, you couldn't find anywhere. Like nothing was really off limits. You could come up with this wild story with millions of parallel universal characters all coming together to take on this one threat, or really far out concepts like one of my all-time favorite series is Sandman by Neil Gaiman. I love that series. And I don't think you could get that in any other medium but comics.
Comics opens up a whole different world of possibility. And a lot of it comes from the fact that we're not limited. We have artists who do an amazing, spectacular job bringing to life what's stuck in a writer's head. And I always say, I know I did my job right as a writer when I hand them a script and I see the art come back. And when that art blows me away, I'm like, oh, I did it. That's better than I ever saw it in my head. And that's what it is. Comics, we have this blank, no one tells us a budget. We don't have to worry about a budget. Besides the cost of printing, really, we sit down and we just go, here's my story. And I'll add pages. I don't care, because I'm a storyteller. I know a lot of creators feel the same way. If it needs 10 extra pages, it's going to have 10 extra pages. I'll make it a double issue. But we get to do that in comics, where in movies, you can't go more than 2.5 hours. The audience, we heard complaining about Batman. That was just too far. People felt like it was just, and they have that limitation. We don't. We can do that one issue and then another issue and another issue. And we can also go across the whole gamut. Like right now, I have several titles in work, and especially as a writer, I can run between each one of them. And I have all these different worlds that are being built. And I think that's what's special about comics, is that so many of us can work on so many different projects at the same time, and it just flows. So there's a magic with comics. It started with the cave. When everyone drew on those cave walls and told their stories, we're just continuing a long legacy of storytellers through art and word.
Telling today's modern day legends, where future aliens that explore our world millions of years from now will all be convinced that we worship the mouse.
Some of us do. Let me tell you, I live in Florida. It's true. There are definitely mouse worshippers.
One reason I really wanted this conversation is when I was going to get your thoughts on the importance of social media and its impact, because when it comes to journalism, social media gets there's a strong love-hate relationship, and it gets a bit of a bad rap, and some of it is deserved, because now it's so much easier for so many fringe groups to start spreading misinformation and to pass things off that aren't really news. And that becomes a problem because people start to get in their echo chambers and only hear what they want to hear. But on the flip side, and this is something that I've thought, why I've argued social media, in the end, you have your good piles, your bad. There's more good, because in addition to all that, it does connect us, and it allows for, like you were saying, independent creators to start getting together and put their stuff out in a way that just never was possible before. I hope I haven't stolen any thoughts you had, but what are your thoughts about social media and its impact in that way?
Like you said, there's the bad side, the devil's side, the godly side, and then the center. And you can make that echo chamber that becomes dangerous. It says all the things that you might not feel like you're allowed to say, and that can become dangerous because they can reinforce bad ideas instead of dealing with them. We see the abuse, and on the other side, you can meet people who are going to inspire your world. I mean, I went through a lot, especially with my mother's death and dealing with a lot of childhood trauma in the last 5 years. And I'll tell you something, I watched those videos of just motivational speeches, and that rose me up. And I wouldn't have had that because that's part of social media. That's YouTube. We forget how much we have now versus just 100 years ago where someone died because they didn't wash their hands. Like, we are a privileged generation that can connect with people from across the globe. My rules about social media is, first off, when strangers are yelling at you, remind yourself they're strangers. They have no idea who you are. Everyone is just there to argue. It's the worst of humans. It's the last bit of that human nature that needs to fight, and that's where it goes to the internet. Freedom of speech is an amazing thing. You can walk away and not listen to someone who's talking to you. Why on social media do you stay and take the abuse? That's what we have to look at social media as. Someone's being rude to you, disrespectful to you, there's this block thing, just block them. And if you treat social media that way, the way you treat yourself in real life, you'd walk away from 90% of the nonsense you see. You'd be like, oh, I'm not going in there. I can tell that's not a place I'll be happy. Treat social media that way. Find the good hangouts for you. Find where you're going to be happy. Don't get to places that we all inherently know when we say something out loud. Maybe I'm not right about this. Don't seek someone to make you right. Seek the opposite. Seek someone who can make you wrong and see if you're right that way. You treat it that way as a scientific and a place of knowledge. And again, accredited sites. Like he said, look, the media gets a lot, but I like printed media. I like printed media because they can be sued. I like places that really take their time to do investigative journalism. I actually respect journalism. I don't respect sensationalism of journalism, which we find on cable network broadcast channels. That's the danger, is that we now read headlines instead of stories. And we only do that on social media. It's us that makes social media bad. It's not that social media is inherently bad. It is who we interact with. So you interact with cool people. Like, I don't tolerate nonsense. And I'm sure you've seen me a couple of times shut something down where I'm like, nope, you're done. Say one more thing and you're off my page. Because being around me, I always think that that's also a benefit of all I've done, all I've created. So if you're going to come in and say something nasty to anyone, including myself, we don't want you here. You treat social media that way, trust me, people start behaving a lot better. People start actually learning to not say certain things around you, and you find peace. So I think social media is what you make it, actually. And if you're an open-minded person, you don't want to get into fights, and you're not there to take out your animosities of the world on other people, you'll find a good place on social media and enjoy it.
Good point. It's a tool, essentially, and it's a tool can be used however. Like a great lesson we learned from the Terminator series. In the first film, the tool is used to kill everybody in sight, and then in the second film, when it's taking orders from a child, it becomes a tool for protecting people.
Yeah, and that's the beauty. That's the beauty of the world. It's how we explore it, we interact with it, and we treat it. If we're putting negativity into the world, I guarantee you're going to get negativity back. If you focus on the positive, take the hits when you have to, but keep going forward, positive things will come your way. And I know that to just be true.
Let's hear about your personal projects. In addition to, we talked all about your advocacy work, which is fantastic, self-serving. It's benefited me a few times. But let's hear about your projects, because I know you've got several.
All right. So I always go to the shows and I go, I'm an escape dealer who tells stories about desires, monsters, and more. And I always ask the people, what do you want? And there's all across the board. So what I'm going to do is we're going to talk about more recent as opposed to everything, because I don't want to be the guy who says 1,000 things and everyone's like, huh? I think he said something about a cow. I'll give you what's happening here. So Cat Dance Supermom just released its second issue. Super excited to announce the third issue with my autistic son, Jax, which this is based on. He's actually right down there in the corner. Came up with the story for the next actual book. He's going to get, at the age of 7, 8, depending on when we release it, a actually co-creator and writer credit, as we have gone back and forth this summer so far, writing the story. Now, I'll do the heavy lifting. I'm not going to lie to anyone. But the fact that he came up with it, he decided the things he wanted, I could take and collaborate with him, is an amazing thing. And that, again, starts with an autistic kid who used to rip every book up. And now he goes to Comic Cons and literally goes, "Excuse me, would you like a comic?" He tries to sell comics. He does it, though, because he thinks he's going to get Lego toys if we have money. The minute we have money, he wants to go to another table to spend it. And then we have Continuum. Continuum Expanse is going to be on Kickstarter really soon. And we're taking a couple of the original stories and making them bigger. So we're giving you the second parts to a lot of these stories. Some of them, like Wolf and Fox, which is about a divorced duo who are learning to co-parent a city together after getting a divorce, who wants to work with their ex, right? And we're going to show you what happens in the second part and then release the full issue in just a few weeks. Then we're going to have also coming out from Continuum Comics, Hero Wing got picked up for another part 2. That's a hero, the old world's only superhero, would rather be a wrestler. So you have to pay him millions of dollars an hour to motivate him to actually be the world's only superhero. So we have that. We have a couple other projects that we're working on in the background. Like I want to do, and this I actually want to talk to you about. I want to do, where Continuum Comics is going to do garage days, where I'm going to go to creators and get their original work. The stuff that we never intended to publish but put out. I think that would be amazing and inspirational for other people to see it, to see where we started, and to motivate people like, hey, everyone's got to start somewhere. So that's super excited. That's all under the Continuum brand. Eclipse 2, which is the world's Hawaiian superhero who does not want to leave Hawaii. You know, and you always hear about like the Hawaiian hero, and he's in New York fighting with the X-Men, and it's like he's just Hawaiian by choice. Like it had nothing to do with it. No, this character has no desire to leave Hawaii. And that's actually created by Mike Seeley, my partner over in Continuum Comics. And it was interesting, he asked me to help him write it. And I love writing, but this was the first time I wasn't really in charge, where I was going to do like a full issue. I've worked in the past where I had editors, but this was the first time it was someone else's work, where they weren't just giving me free reign. I had to check in with him. And that's, of course, a building block towards Marvel and DC. You're going to have to talk to your editors. So that was a really interesting thing. We have some other stuff cooking in the background. Like I said, it's all going to be coming. You guys can check out continuumcomics.com. We're always doing it. That's COMIX, because that's a nod to Underground Comics, which started what we have today. Whether you call yourself creator-owned, indie comics, or anything here and in between, it all starts with Underground Comics. So that's why we go by the COMIX, because without them, we wouldn't be the thing we are today as creators. Plus print on demand. Thank God for print on demand.
Yes, no kidding. I would not be able to survive at all if printing mine. If I had to print, I don't know what the bare minimum used to be, thousands upon thousands.
10,000. There was a point where it was 10,000. So, I know what you mean. Like, I got into comics. Like, there's a reason I was in comics for 20 years, but this is my 10-year anniversary of having released my first book. My first book was also printed at basically at Kinko's. It was Staples, but like I went to Staples to print my first book back in 2012. And even then, that was expensive. You wouldn't think it, but color copies, kids, back then were like 50 cents a page. It was insanity. And we were doing this to give it out at Comic Cons, because the hope was that someone from Marvel and DC would see you, you'd win the lottery, and you'd be picked up as a writer. Being a writer, to all the writers out there, nothing but love. You guys got the hardest job in the world. You try to write a Batman story as fan art, you will see lawyers so quickly, you'll think they're the FBI. You don't get to do a lot of fan art. You have to struggle, but don't get discouraged. Keep writing, because only you have that story. So I always look at it that way. You just keep moving, you just keep going, and print on demand came out. It's a whole different world. Kickstarter changed the world. And now print on demand is giving way to PDFs. Finally, PDFs are taking off. The one good thing out of the last 2 years is that because they couldn't get out the fans of comics to stores, they started reading PDFs. QRC codes got the second life that they needed within this world. So things are constantly changing. Don't bury your head in the sand. Don't think what worked yesterday is going to work tomorrow. Facebook algorithms always changing. Everyone's algorithms are changing, and no one's trying to help you. So you got to be clever. You got to be the smart fox, and you got to talk to fellow creators to find out what's working.
Yep, absolutely. Well, as for our time's running down, we've talked about all of your projects and everything. Do you want to plug any of your social media or any other websites that you've got so people know where to find you?
Sure, you can find me at comicbookadvocates.com doing my advocating thing. You can find Cat Dad and Superman, which we talked about. Believe it or not, it's being published under Scout Comics Scoot Line for all ages. So you can go to catdadandsupermom.com and actually get a book from them, because that's where I have that going, redirecting. Of course, support all creators on Kickstarter. If you haven't ever done a Kickstarter, backed it, seen it, go to kickstarter.com today and just look around the site. Look around, see what it's about. Continuum Comics and is where our news for Continuum is. But if you want a comic from actually Continuum Comics, we have a website just for it, and it's a cool name. It's We Are Comics. So it's COMIX again. And finally, you can find me on all of social media. I made it really easy. And this is something I tell all creators now, because as he said, I've done a lot of things. And for a long time, people were almost confused by how much I did. And it was nickname for this, nickname for that, something that I finally had to embrace just being myself. So if you look at Mr. Anderson on Google, it'll pop up everywhere I am on social media. It's an amazing trick. I suggest everyone else do it. As a creator, you're going to have to become your brand until your brand becomes a bigger brand than you. And that's the hope of every writer. No one wants to be remembered as the talent when it comes to writing. Like Stephen King will always tell you he'd rather his books be more popular than him. And that's what all of us writers want. We want you to read it. But to get there, we have to convince you to come on the journey. And again, I create very different comics, from desires to monsters to more, and the more is forever growing. I will create anything. My newest thing is somehow I'm going to write a book about dinosaurs, just because the little kid inside of me loves dinosaurs. How far it's going to go, where it's going to go, I'm not saying that they're going to wind up in space, but I'm planning for them to wind up in space. And how it happens, that'll be Mike's job to reel me back in. So the little kid's going to come out and be like, no, the dinosaur's it's going to be fine. They're going to have like giant spacesuit.
I'm there. I'll read that. All right. Well, thanks so much. It's been a great talking to you, and all the perspective and insight that you got. So thanks for advocating for me in the past, and thanks for doing this with me.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
All right. Thank you again, Mr. Anderson, for that informative chat. Thanks for the times that you've put the word out about my projects, and thanks for the times you put the word out about other people's projects. I've been able to connect with other creators and find comics and projects that I wouldn't have been able to experience, read, whatever, had it not been for you and the network that you've created. So thanks for that. I'd encourage all of you out there to follow Mr. Anderson on all of his various social media channels. That's exactly what it would be written as, Mr. Anderson, spelled Sin, S-I-N. Look him up on every single social media channel that he mentioned. Follow him there. Support him if you're interested in comics. Support the people that he helps get the word out about. Like I said, it's a small but mighty community of creators out there, and it's a fascinating subculture, once again, for lack of a better word. Anyway, so as we barrel toward the conclusion of this podcast, I got to make sure and mention all of the important cheap plugs that we have. This podcast is a production of Schorr Manor Studios, which does have its own social media channels, and there are some great ways that you can follow us. So let's just break it all down, shall we? We are on YouTube. Just check us out the easiest way, tinyurl.com/Schorr Manor YouTube. Follow us on there, subscribe. We're getting a pretty nice number of subscribers on there. Let's see if we can keep this train rolling. So subscribe there so that you can get all of our podcasts all in full video, not to mention various other videos that we have, not least of which would include interviews and clips from our Gravediggers magazine, and short clips that my wife has started putting together. And finally, of course, another spin-off, I guess you might say, of this podcast, our weird news show, where we dive into all the weird and crazy news that actually is happening in the world today. You can also follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Schorr Manor. We're also on Twitter, twitter.com/Schorr Manor, and Instagram Schorr Manor. Keeping it all pretty easy here. And last but not least, we have climbed aboard the TikTok bandwagon. Once again, you can find us on there at Schorr Manor. Another great way, if you're a little bit old school, you can sign up for our newsletter. Just visit tinyurl.com/Schorr Manor newsletter. And last, there is the official website of this podcast, www.mattschorr.net. That's MATTSCHORR.net. Just click on the podcast link at the top of the page. And finally, if you would like to follow me, you can certainly do that as well. I'm on various different channels. I'm on Twitter at the Matt Schorr. I'm on Instagram at the Schorr, and I am also on TikTok at the one Matt Schorr. That's the numeral one Matt Schorr. Thanks again for checking out this podcast. I hope you'll subscribe to this as well as following all of Mr. Anderson's various projects. And as always, keep reading and keep listening. Thanks.